Welcome to Cardboard Content, where we aim to develop our skills and grow the competitive Commander community. Hey guys, it's me Benedict. Thank you for joining me here on another week. We got some good news and some bad news. Bad news, I didn't get to finish or cut the top 10 match because it never finished, unfortunately. Good news, we have the finals for you cut and edit, and it's a long one. So much happened in the game, and here it is. We have player 1 Carl playing Talion with a starting hand of 5. Then Rodrigo on Nixilis, starting hand of 5. Cody on Marchesa, starting hand of 6. And Brasher on Magda, starting hand of 6. Carl starts us off with a polluted Delta, shocks in a watery grave, casts Jeweled Lotus, and then plays a turn 1 Talion, naming 2. We move on to Rodrigo's turn. He plays a Scalding Tarn, then plays a Chromox, exiling Light Up the Stage, and then passes to Cody. On Cody's turn, he plays the Undercity Sewers and bins a Praetor's Grasp. We move on to Brasher's turn. He plays Mountain, into a Soul Ring, into a Metallic Mimic, triggering Carl's Talion. He takes 2 and Carl draws a card. We move on to Carl's turn. He plays a Verdant Catacombs, then plays a Mana Vault, then attacks Rodrigo for 3 and passes the turn. On Carl's end step, Rodrigo plays a Blood Crypt into play tapped, draws a card, misses his land drop, and then passes to Cody. On Cody's turn, he bolts himself with Fellmire. He casts Demonic Tutor, triggering Talion, and then passes the turn to Brasher. On Brasher's turn, he plays Mountain, then his commander Magda, which triggers Talion again. Carl draws, then cracks his Verdant Catacombs, and plays the Underground Sea. Then Brasher plays a Bloodfire Dwarf. In response to Bloodfire Dwarf, Cody responds with a Snuff Out, targeting Magda. He moves into combat and attacks Cody for 2. On Carl's third turn, he plays a Darkslick Shores, and then passes to Rodrigo. On Rodrigo's turn, he plays Soul Ring, and then passes turn to Cody. On Cody's turn, he exiles Simian Spirit Guide for a red, and then plays his commander Marchesa. He plays his land Forbidden Orchard, and then passes to Brasher. Brasher plays Professional Facebreaker, moves into combat, and attacks Cody and Rodrigo. Carl responds to combat with Orcish Bowmaster and pings Metallic Mimic. Rodrigo takes 2 and triggers Professional Facebreaker. Brasher nets a treasure. Then Brasher casts Axeguard Cavalry, triggering Talion. We move on to Carl's turn. He plays Island, then casts Gilded Drake. Cody responds by tapping Forbidden Orchard, committing a crime with Forbidden Orchard, and triggering Marchesa. He discards a Brain Freeze, then casts Force of Will to the Gilded Drake, exiling a Pongify. Then Carl plays Talisman of Dominance, then Shakashima, targeting Talion and naming 3, then attacks Rodrigo for 3. On Rodrigo's turn, he plays his commander Nixilis, triggers Talion, and Carl draws a card. He passes to Cody. On Cody's turn, he plays a Mayhem Devil, triggers Talion, and then passes to Brasher. Brasher recasts Magda, triggering Talion again. Carl responds with Subtlety, exiling a Mental Misstep. Brasher passes turn to Carl. On Carl's turn, he takes 1 damage from Mana Vault, which triggers up Nixilis and gets Rodrigo a Mountain. Plays a Bloodstained Mire, then moves into combat and attacks Cody and Brasher. Then Carl casts Curse Totem, then passes the turn to Rodrigo. On Rodrigo's turn, he plays his Mountain from exile, then casts Jessica's Will, triggering Talion, then targets Carl with Jessica's Will, netting 4 red mana, exiling a Swamp, Invasion of Azgul, and an all-would-be one. Then he casts a Pyretic Ritual, triggering Talion again, and Carl casts Mana Drain in response. Then Rodrigo casts Invasion of Azgul. He targets Cody to sacrifice a creature, and then he loses 1 life, which triggers Nixilis. Cody sacrifices Mayhem Devil, which triggers Mayhem Devil's ability, and he targets Orcish Bowmaster. And then Rodrigo exiles Kessig Flame Breather for Ob. Then Rodrigo moves into combat and attempts to attack Carl. Carl responds with a Chain of Vapor, targeting Nixilis. Rodrigo responds with a Deadly Rollick, targeting his commander Talion. Then passes the turn to Cody. On Cody's turn, he draws a card and immediately passes the turn to Brasher. On Brasher's turn, he recasts his commander Magda, then moves into combat and attacks. Second main phase, Brasher casts Magda, the Horde Master. Then casts Dwarven Bloodboiler, triggering Talion. Then casts Dwarven Trader. At Brasher's end step, Carl cracks his fetch land for Undercity Sewers and surveils into the graveyard a Fell Warstone. Moving on to Carl's turn, he plays a Snow-Covered Swamp, then recasts his commander Talion, naming 2. On Rodrigo's turn, he plays a Snow-Covered Swamp, he plays Mox Opal. Cody responds by tapping his Forbidden Orchard, committing a crime, using Marchesa's ability and discarding a Hex Parasite, then cast a Rending Volley, targeting Sakashima the Imposter, also triggering Marchesa and discarding a Cyclonic Rift. Mox Opal finally resolves, then Rodrigo casts Ob Nixilis, then Wishclaw Talisman, triggering Talion. Then he passes the turn to Cody. On Cody's turn, he plays Volcanic Island, then casts Flesh Duplicate, then choosing Talion, and then also naming 2. He passes turn to Brasher. On Brasher's turn, he plays a Winter Moon, triggering both Talions, then moves into combat and attacks. Then passes turn to Carl. Carl's draw step, Mana Vault pings him for 1, Ob Nixilis triggers, and gets Rodrigo a Verdant Catacomb. Then Carl casts Imposter Mech, triggering Talion, then choosing to copy Ob Nixilis. We pass to Rodrigo's turn. He activates Wishclaw, then casts a Keteric Parasite, and then passes turn to Cody. On Cody's turn, he draws a card, triggers the Parasite, which triggers both Ob Nixilises. Rodrigo exiles Firebrand Archer, and Carl exiles a Spellskite. Then plays Hammerheim. Passes turn to Brasher. Brasher draws, triggers both Ob Nixilises again. Rodrigo gets a Gemstone Caverns, and Carl a Flusterstorm. He activates Wishclaw Talisman, then casts a Braid, targeting Cursed Totem, triggering both Talions. They both draw, triggers the Parasite, which triggers Ob Nixilis twice for Rodrigo and once for Carl. Rodrigo gets a Mana Crypt and a Mox Amber, and Carl exiles a Command Tower. Carl casts from exile Flusterstorm, targeting the Abrade. Brasher sacks his treasures to pay for Flusterstorm. Abrade resolves. Brasher activates Dwarven Bloodboiler by tapping Magda and Dwarven Trader to net 2 treasures. Cody responds by casting Rapid Hybridization, targeting Magda. Then Brasher responds by tapping Dwarven Bloodboiler and Axe Guard Cavalry. Then Cody responds by casting Fire Covenant, targeting Keteric Parasite, Dwarven Bloodboiler, and Magda. Brasher responds by tapping Bloodfire Dwarf and netting a treasure. Fire Covenant resolves. Then Brasher passes turn to Carl. On Carl's turn, Mana Vault triggers, Ob Nixilis triggers, Rodrigo gets a Swamp, Carl plays his Command Tower for turn, then casts Spellskite, then casts Mystic Remora. He casts Demonic Tutor, triggering Cody's Talion, then Carl casts Deadly Rollick, targeting Ob Nixilis. We move on to Rodrigo's turn. Rodrigo plays Swamp, then Mana Crypt, triggering Mystic Remora, then recast Ob Nixilis, then casts Firebrand Archer, triggering Talions, then passes turn to Cody. Cody plays in Otawara, then casts Mana Crypt, triggering Mystic Remora, then activates Wishclaw Talisman. Cody casts Dockside Extortionist. Carl casts Force of Will, pitching a Limdual's Vault, triggering Ob Nixilis. Rodrigo exiles a Mirkwood Bats. Dockside gets countered, and then we pass to Brasher's turn. Brasher recasts Magda, triggering both Talions again, sacks 5 treasures. To activate Magda's ability, Carl responds with Tashana's Tidebinder, triggering Talion. Tashana's resolves and blanks Magda. Brasher activates Axe Guard Cavalry, targeting Magda, and attacks with Magda. Then passes turn to Carl. On Carl's 9th turn, Mana Vault pings him for 1, triggers Ob. Rodrigo gets an Exotic Orchard. Carl plays Mox Diamond, pitching a Mana Confluence, then casting Sensei's Divining Top. On Rodrigo's turn, he rolls for Mana Crypt, takes no damage, then casts Imperial Seal, triggering Mystic Remora, then plays Exotic Orchard, then casts Walking Ballista for 3, then casts Mirkwood Bats, triggering both Talions. Then Rodrigo passes to Cody. Cody rolls for his Mana Crypt, takes 3, and then passes turn to Brasher. On Brasher's turn, he moves into combat and attacks Carl. Carl responds by crewing up his Ob Nixilis, with Tashana's Tidebinder and blocking, Brasher responds by cracking his Bloodfire Dwarf and dealing 1 damage to each non-flying creature. Then Rodrigo pings Spellskite 3 additional times, dealing lethal to Spellskite. Then Brasher passes to Carl. On Carl's turn, Mana Vault pings him again, triggering Nixilis, and Rodrigo exiles a Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Carl plays Plaza of Heroes, then passes turn to Rodrigo. Rodrigo rolls for Mana Crypt. He is safe, then casts Agatha's Soul Cauldron, triggers Talion and Mystic Remora. He pays for Mystic Remora. Then Carl counters with Force of Negation. Then Rodrigo casts Grim Hireling. Rodrigo moves into combat. Carl responds with Dress Down. At Rodrigo's end step, Cody casts Sink into Stupor, targeting Wintermoon, triggering Mystic Remora. We go to Cody's turn. He rolls for Mana Crypt, takes no damage, then casts Chromox, triggers Mystic Remora, then casts Hoarding Broodlord, then passes turn to Brasher. On Brasher's turn, he plays Wintermoon, triggers Mystic Remora and Talion, then passes turn to Carl. On Carl's turn, he doesn't pay for Mystic Remora, moves into draw, and takes 1 damage from Mana Vault, triggers Ob again, and Rodrigo reveals a Dismember. Carl plays Mana Crypt, cracks his Misty Rainforest, triggers Ob, Rodrigo gets a D-Tutor, and then Carl casts Hullbreaker Horror. Rodrigo gets a Demonic Tutor, then casts Lotus Petal, triggering Hullbreaker Horror, targeting Mana Crypt. Then recasts Mana Crypt, triggering Hullbreaker Horror, targeting Lotus Petal. Cody responds with a Mindbreak Trap. Carl responds back with a Pact of Negation. Then Cody responds next with a Flusterstorm. Mindbreak resolves, encounters Mana Crypt. Carl moves into combat and deals 2 more points of damage to Rodrigo. Then passes turn to Cody. On Cody's turn, he rolls for Mana Crypt, casts Demonic Consultation, and names Underworld Breach. Then casts Burnt Offering, sacrificing Hoarding Broodlord. Carl responds by casting Vampiric Tutor, triggering Hullbreaker Horror, and bouncing back a Burnt Offering. Brasher responds by casting Flare of Duplication, targeting Vampiric Tutor. Then Cody plays Swamp, then casts Underworld Breach, triggering Talion. Carl responds by activating Sensei's Divining Top, then casting Fierce Guardianship, triggering Hullbreaker Horror, and bouncing Wintermoon. Cody passes turn to Brasher. Brasher, on his turn, casts Dockside Extortionist, triggering Talion. It resolves, then Brasher recasts his commander Magda, triggering Talion again. Brasher activates Axguard Cavalry, targeting Magda, moves into combat, and attacks Cody. Brasher recasts Wintermoon, and then passes turn to Carl. On Carl's turn, Mana Vault pings him for 1. Then he plays Mox Amber, triggering Hullbreaker Horror, bouncing Lotus Petal, recasting Lotus Petal, triggering Horror to bounce the Mox Amber. With this loop established, he creates infinite blue and black mana, then casts a Mnemonic Betrayal to cast Cody's Hoarding Broodlord, which tutors up a card. Then Carl casts Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, then casts Consultation, exiling his deck, then activates and triggers Jace, winning him the game. Good job, Carl. And congratulations to Carl for winning the Timetwister event. Thank you to everyone again who attended the event. It was a great turnout for us. Could be better, but always appreciate your guys' support. And thank you everyone for watching. End game summation. I aim always to maximize my efforts. I got a peek at your hand, Carl, and it seems like at this point you could have fetched before you drawn a card, just so you minimize the chances of drawing a land in your deck. It's just optimization. It's just not a wrong play. It's just could be better. In this interaction, Cody, it seems like you wanted to cycle through your deck and get a bit more interaction, maybe looking for land, because it seems like you were short land at that point. But you could have just cast the Pongify instead of spending 2 of your cards, the Force of Will and the Pongify, to get rid of the Gilded Drake. Just wait for that ETB to happen. Blast that Gilded Drake with your Pongify, and if there's no exchange to be had, then it won't happen. There is a lot of Talion debate on the internet, people saying if it's 1 or 2. I'm on team 1, but a lot of the majority is team 2. Ideally, you want to pick one of those 2 numbers. You went ahead and jumped it to 3. I know a few of their commanders had that 3 casting cost, but There's a lot more 1 casting cost spells and 1 power and toughness creatures out there than the 3 from the usual competitive commander standpoint. Aim for 1 or 2 most of the time. On this interaction brasher, you could have won the game at this point. You want to tap your dwarves and wait people to respond to them. You tap 1, see if any interaction is going to happen. You create 1 treasure. Now you're at 4. Tap another one, and then at this point, someone has to respond. You had, I think, 4 more dwarves you could have tapped prior to getting your net 5 treasures. So there was no way for them to stop you unless they had a 3rd removal spell. But you tap, wait for them to respond, make a treasure. They wouldn't at that point because it's just 4 treasures. Then you make a 5th, then they respond. Then you make a 5th on top of that, another 5th, then they respond again. And then you still had 2 more times you could have tapped your dwarves to make that 5th treasure and then win on top of any other removal for that. In this interaction brasher, you could have responded to Tashana's Tidebinder on top of what was happening, just tapping and getting that extra treasure, which could have helped you later on in the game. Carl, you had a miss trigger here. You could have won the game on this turn itself. You missed the bounce trigger when casting your last spell. You still get the bounce. You target the mana vault and then repeat to get infinite colorless. Then with the last bounce, you bounce your mech, copying the Hoarding Broodlord to tutor for a rock that makes you get any colored mana. Then you continue the loop with your colored mana source by bouncing it with Hullbreaker Horror and netting colored mana. The last bounce after you get your colored mana will return Tashana's Tidebinder to your hand. Then you tap the top to draw a card. You respond to the draw by flashing in Tashana's Tidebinder to bounce the top to your hand. Now you have a draw trigger on the stack. You draw the top card of your deck and you have a top in your hand that you could infinitely cast. So you recast that and then bounce the Tashana's Tidebinder back to your hand and then draw again and then bounce the top again to your hand. At this point you have infinite mana and the whole deck in your hand, so winning would be very easy at that point. It was a long day for everyone and miss triggers are bound to happen. It's very difficult for everyone to play 100% at the time. If you enjoyed this event, we have another one coming up October 12th. It will be Grim Knight at Darkside. Top 4 get a Grim Monolith each. First place will get a collector box of Duskmourn for first place. So head to darksidegames.com to register, or you can head to topdeck.gg, linked down below to register for the event. Also down below is our Patreon. On our Patreon, you can get this game full uncut with the yap and everyone talking at the table to see how long the actual game was, to see what their interaction and how they politicked their ways and plays in the game match. And these people here who supported our Patreon get to see the match. And now the core of this community, the heart and soul that keeps everything going, are patrons. Our tier 2 content consumers: Big Yoda at 8, Aaron at 6, Marcus at 6, Dylan at 5, Troy at 5, and Rodrigo at 2. Now tier 3 cardboard cutouts: Wong at 11, Matt at 10, Albert at 9, and then Joiner at 5. Thank you again for your continued support. If you'd like to support the channel, go to patreon.com/cardboardcontent. See you next time for more content.